For urbanites, the environment can feel like something far away and separate from us. We often think the environment means forest and coast, mountains and prairies. But urban environments aren't just critical to how we interact with the world. They're where 56% of the world's population lives, and where an estimated 70% will live by 2050. As a result, the way we build our cities has profound impacts on our climate and the world around us. So, how are we preparing for a world where more and more people live in cities? What are we doing to make our cities more livable and sustainable? And what does the future of urbanism in Houston look like? I'm Weston Twardowski, an instructor in Rice University's Environmental Studies program and the program manager of the Diluvial Houston Initiative, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. So today on Gulf Streams, we're speaking with two officials from the City of Houston, Margaret Wallace Brown, Director of Planning and Development, and David Fields, Chief Transportation Officer. Margaret, David, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Hi there.
And so just to start us off, can you talk a little bit about both what you do for the city, but also how you found yourselves in these roles?
I'll start. Margaret Wallace Brown. I am the director of the department. And so I joined the city in 1986 during the one of our recessions in Houston, thinking that it would be a safe place to land for a couple of years. I am almost a lifetime Houstonian. Grew up in the Clear Lake area. Went to the University of Houston for college and have stayed in the Houston area really in downtown Houston my whole adult life. And I thought this would be a great way to kind of learn and to experience public service for a couple of years. And lo and behold, 38 years later, I am the director. Worked myself up through the ranks of the department doing some of the most fascinating things that you could do in this city, whether it was census outreach or annexation or development services work, neighborhood planning. It's been just kind of an amazing career that has fed me in many, many different ways.
So sure. Hi, I'm David Fields. I'm the city's chief transportation planner. My grandparents were immigrants to the United States. They moved to the Lower East Side in New York City. Them and siblings on both sides never learned how to drive, never owned a car their whole lives. And I spent a lot of time with them when I was growing up. We would take the subway everywhere, and then at some point we stopped taking the subway, we took the bus, and I was a kid. It all seemed like fun to me. Then we stopped taking the bus, we walked around their neighborhood, and then we stopped walking to one side of the neighborhood and went to the other park and the other grocery store. Never understood why. Years later, my father explained to me, well, your grandparents were just happy to be in the United States. They had escaped war. They were never one to complain. But it got to the point that they couldn't walk down the steps to the subway. It was just too much for them. So they took the bus, and they were going to be fine with it. And then walking even up the 3 steps to get on the bus ended up being too much for them. So they walked in their neighborhood, and it was a place they loved. And then they couldn't cross the big street on one traffic signal cycle. So they stopped going to the good grocery store with the good fruit that my grandmother liked, and we stopped going to that playground. We just went to the other side. And I realized that each one of those things were completely in our control. There's nothing law, there's nothing biblical. It's how we have built our places. And if we built it one way, we can build it another way. So my mission as a planner is to create places my grandparents could live. And when Mayor Turner and Director Wallace Brown were looking for somebody to lead the transportation group, this was just the perfect opportunity to help Houston get to that next step.
Thank you so much. Those are really exciting. It's wonderful to hear both about your separate backgrounds, but also that you're clearly thinking very long term about what this city needs to look like and what those priorities are. So I just want to start off by addressing a little bit of the reasons that I'm excited to have you with us today, and that's that urban design plays this really critical role in how we build more sustainable cities. In particular, urban sprawl creates this range of environmental problems, and when I talk about that, folks tend to think of cars and imagine that it's just the air pollution that's a primary concern, and that's a factor, one that arguably is getting better with electric cars, still a little bit of a tomorrow issue. But actually, I'm really thinking about a lot of land use. And I'm thinking about, we know flooding is a concern in Houston. We know infrastructure is critical to how we move and exist around town. And these are problems that sprawl really directly exacerbates, both in new exurban development that chews further into prairie lands and wetlands that help us protect us from flooding. And the further that we build out, it gets harder and harder to maintain that infrastructure like you were just describing, that makes it easy for people to get around in myriad ways. And so the Houston metro area, I just want to take a moment to recognize, is about 10,000 square miles, which is larger than Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Vermont. And one of the things we can do to address this is thinking about density and how to densify our cities. And I know that's something that you've been working a lot on in thinking of different ways to live in Houston and exist in Houston. So that's a lot of prefacing, but I really want to get into some of the really exciting work that's going on, thinking about things like infill development that I know we'll talk about. So just to start us off, I think one of the really exciting programs that you've been running is this Livable Cities, Livable Places initiative. Can you talk to us about what that is and why it's significant?
Certainly. So in 2020, we completed what we called the Walkable Places Initiative, which is an attempt to provide a safer pedestrian realm. It was really the city's first step into context-sensitive requirements for parking, context-sensitive requirements for driveway width, and how buildings affected or addressed the public realm, the street. And as we looked at that, we realized that we had created incentives for development to focus around areas that were transit rich, that were developing more transit opportunities, more multimodal opportunities than those that weren't. And so we thought that was a good step forward in helping. I guess let me step back just a moment and say that in the same way David says that the urban form is how we build things. How we had built our development regulations were that we really were encouraging. It is easier for someone in the Houston area to build a greenfield development than it is to build inside the city. Our rules really do promote the development of neighborhoods beyond our city limits. We make it easier. We go through the platting and the development and the permitting process easier than we do. It's much harder to build inside the city. And we see that in the number of single family and the number of developments that take place outside our city versus inside. And so with this transit-oriented development, we thought we had taken a really strong step forward to helping promote inside the city. Living through it for a couple of years, seeing what we expected to see was more development taking place inside the inner city. We started to look more carefully at what is it that's causing this development to still go outside. And this was really combined with the housing affordability crisis that we're in. Cities across the nation are having an affordability crisis. We have not built enough homes for Americans for 12 or 15 years. And so now we're all in a place where we're trying to catch up. But what we are building are homes in Greatwood, as Mayor Turner calls them, in the lands, sugarlands, woodlands. And so what he wants and what he encouraged was more development inside the city, again, increasing that density. So we sat down and we looked at all of the rules that we have and what is in our rules that are creating increased cost for development inside the city. Why are we causing? What is it that we're doing that's causing housing costs to go up? Land costs are separate, and we can't really address that directly. But what in our rules? And so Livable Places was a way of looking at our rules and trying to reduce what we could that could reduce the cost of building inside the city. The greatest example I have is that fourplexes, sixplexes, they're ubiquitous in Houston. And if you became an adult in Houston in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, you probably lived in one as an apartment. We haven't permitted a fourplex in Houston in probably 20-something years.
Wow.
They are just so hard to build because we require too much parking, we require too wide a driveway, we require too many things that make them not pencil out. And so what can we do from the planning department's perspective to change the the rules associated with them, and we did. And so that's what Livable Places was all about. We increased the ability of somebody to put a garage apartment on the back of their in the back of their lot, or even just on their property in any way. They were limited to 900 square feet. Now they're 1,500 square feet. We've reduced the parking required for them. The fourplexes, the sixplexes, even up to eightplexes, we've reduced the driveway and the parking. And then we created something new. Houston has, for many years, had effectively a 1,400 square foot minimum lot size, which is much smaller than what many, many other large cities in America have. And we've been touted as being progressive because of that over the years. But is 1,400 really as small as we can get and still provide good open space and air and good development? And so we looked at that and created what we're calling a courtyard-style development, where no maximum density, no minimum lot size, as long as you provide adequate open space. And effectively, it's 150 square feet of green space for every unit.
Oh, wow.
And so building these smaller homes, and they could be tiny homes, but they don't have to be. They could be a range of sizes around this green space, and how it addresses the public street. We like parking behind. We've reduced the parking required for them. And we have already, this was something that just passed through City Council this past summer, and we've got a line of people waiting for this to be effective so they can start developing this product. So many times in Houston, what we see is a detached, and I don't mean detached single-family home, I mean a detachment from the public realm, where you drive from the street into your garage, and then you live in the back of your house in the backyard, and you don't have any really activity out front. What we're trying to do is create a better public realm, a better pedestrian realm, where there is more activity on the street. Maybe people will start using front yards more than they're using backyards, creating more community. The number one thing we learned after Harvey was how you rebounded after your flood had to do with who you were connected to, how closely you were connected with your neighbors, how closely you were tied to your community. And so all of that, all of those aspects of community life are what we brought into Livable Places. And all of these changes help encourage that. They encourage higher density, but they also encourage more connectivity with the rest of the community.
I think that's, just incredible. One, that the way you're thinking about community building, through urban design, the way that our cities actually shape our networks and who we're engaging with. We were just last week on the show talking about, exactly those social ties post-Harvey and how significant they are. And I love, both that you're pointing us towards, okay, so we're doing really well in this regard, but just because we're doing better than other places doesn't mean we still can't be doing better for ourselves. But also something that I think pops up so often and that people frequently talk about is that idea that, well, Houston has no zoning. So, what's the problem? We've already fixed that. And those regulations, those individual minutiae that really contribute to what we're able to build. So over the last, since I believe 2010, the metro area has gained close to 1.5 million. It's like 1.3 million or something people in the metro area, and the city proper has actually shrunk a little bit. And so, I think it's really fascinating to think about. Oftentimes, that the line we kind of hear is, oh, well, people want single-family homes. They want this suburban style living, and certainly, of course, some people do, but lots of other people don't. Lots of people enjoy living in cities. Lots of people have, desire this easy access to amenities that you're talking about, the kind of community that builds, the kind of walkability that you're talking about for your grandparents, David. It's really, really important to have, I think, that mix of things. And so I'm so glad to hear that. I'm wondering if one of you, either of you, want to talk more about, that you've already said so much on just that community asset, but what does a livable community look like? And I'm thinking certainly that public facing, but also you brought up walkability, and I'm sure bikeability is around the corner too. What about other ways of getting around for people who maybe can't drive or who maybe don't want to have to have a car for every member of their family?
So I think it's everything you just said, plus a little more context. There's certainly the personal choice that some people would like to live in a denser area, more proximate to destinations, to grocery stores and parks that they can walk or bike. There's a fiscal aspect of it that we often kind of overlook. that the cost of transportation is just kind of miraculously covered in a household budget. But when we're smart about it, we think about the cost of housing plus the cost of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be cheaper to buy a house 30 miles west of downtown. But then when you add in the cost of buying at the very least one, probably two, possibly three cars for your household, and the gas and the insurance, at an average cost of a new car of $50,000 and even a used car of $35,000, and then all the annual costs beyond it, it is really impacting our household budgets. But those conversations tend to happen after the housing conversation. If I live here, it is cheaper for the housing itself. And we would do ourselves a great service as planners, as civil servants, to make sure people understand the package of their household budget going to these two major costs. And then when we start to say, look, if you want to go out there, great, that option is available, but you might actually save money if you decide to live here. And we have worked hard on the city side to eliminate all those regulatory barriers so that if you want to, it's available to you. And I think that's really kind of the beauty of livable places, that we have taken as much from our side as we can to make it easy to happen and then really let the market start to work.
I think that's so significant. I'm thinking of this, not to go too personal, but my mother uses a wheelchair and is, unable to drive. And the idea, she loves Houston and she loves visiting, and also is very like, where can I be in Houston that I can get to things and get around easily without necessarily having to drive everywhere. And so, I think exactly as you're saying, there's a huge range of reasons people want different kinds of development. But yeah, can you speak some to, I know a lot of people who are like, well, I'd love to walk around more, I'd love to bike more, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable. And so what are some of the things the city is doing? Because I know there are initiatives going to try to make pedestrians, bikers, folks who are using different forms of transit more comfortable in doing so.
So a few years ago, the city took a look at its sidewalk ordinance. And in short version, the adjacent property owner is responsible for provision and maintenance of that sidewalk. That's a decision by city council, and it happens in different cities as well as in Houston. But that also means, unlike our road network, which is the city's responsibility, which, we say we want a connected roadway network, so if you are driving and you get to a corner, there's a street for you to continue on. We haven't set that policy on the sidewalk network. So we have been working very hard to say, okay, that is starting point A, but there are other things we can do to start building out that network. So the city had established three different smaller sidewalk programs, one led by the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, that if you live in a place and need a sidewalk, the city will build a certain length of it to get you pretty much to the next big street. There's a program to connect schools a certain distance with sidewalks. And then for major thoroughfares, there's also some funds. And what we were finding is as developers were coming in, and they were required to build their own sidewalk as part of that first ordinance, there were just a lot of ways for them not to do it. Either call them loopholes, or maybe there might have been physical constraints about it. But the bottom line is the city was not getting the sidewalks that it had wanted, even through its own regulation. So we worked with a lot of different stakeholders to create, and City Council adopted what's called a sidewalk construction in lieu fee. If you're a developer and you are required to build a sidewalk, under certain circumstances, instead of not building it at all, you can decide to put money into a city fund, not build a sidewalk on your property, and the city will take that money and build longer sidewalks as we collect those funds. The sidewalk, the in lieu fee fund, is divided into different sectors. So 70% of those funds stay pretty close to your own neighborhood, within proximity, and then 30% will be divvied up citywide based on equity needs and other factors like that, because we know the city doesn't develop at the same pace. So that's a way to say, the starting point is you as developer, you should be building your sidewalk. That's what we've said. And really, that's ultimately easier for everybody. But in the cases that it doesn't work, we would rather have a sidewalk somewhere than no sidewalk at all. And, so between the 3 programs we had, as well as this one, we are starting to see the sidewalk network start to pop up and populate a lot more than we had. And it's only been in effect since March, and we're already starting to see that move in the right direction.
Yeah, I think part of our issue in Houston, though, is an awareness issue, and we probably need to do a better job of promoting or explaining the circumstances. I hear a lot from people that everybody in Houston drives. Everybody has a car. Everybody has 2 or 3 cars. And when we were going through the livable places process, we heard that regularly. In fact, the F-150 pickup, let me tell you, is the number 1 car in Houston if it has anything to do with the community engagement we did. But what we need to what I think we failed to do, and what I'd like to figure out how to do better, is to help Houstonians understand that no, not everybody does drive. 48% of the households in Houston have 1 or fewer cars. And a large percentage of that is the 0 car. And they're all over the place. It's not like we're just in neighborhoods of lower income. There are any number of neighborhoods that have a high percentage of 1 or 0 car households.
The first year and a half that I lived here, actually, I was in that, I believe, 8% of households with no cars. So I understand exactly what you're talking about.
And the other issue, so we have to, as a community, stop imagining what's not true anymore, which is that we all drive. And we have to start realizing that our city is changing. And in the 30 years I've worked for the city, I have seen some amazing transformations for our city and have been part of a number of initiatives to help push it forward. And this latest few years, I think we have made more progress in making a city for the 21st century than we had possibly made in the past. But one of the issues is we all complain about traffic and how long we're in our cars. We can't build any more roadways. We cannot find any more space in our roads for more cars. And so what we need to be doing is recognizing that not everybody drives and not everybody should be driving, and we have to provide safe passage for those who don't, whether it's by choice or by inability to buy a car. We have to provide safe passage for those people. And opening the conversation to that, and how do we move people around this city in a more in every way possible, is where we need to be as a city. And that's what's so transformational about the work that David's doing with increasing bicycle infrastructure, with pedestrian infrastructure, and merging it with automobile infrastructure as well, and increasing. And we've got billions of dollars of investment in transit in this city. And so how do we make it all work together and balance so that we're providing what Houstonians need today and in the future? If we build for an auto-centric city today and say we're not going to be multimodal for another 20 years, well, if we build for auto-centric today, we're not going to be multimodal in 20 years. So we've got to be looking 20, 25 years ahead.
I think some of what you're talking about there that's, that I've heard before from certain folks around town about, we're moving towards autonomous vehicles anyway, so that's going to fix, and it's like, they're still cars. They still take up the same amount of space. They're still on the roads in the same way. And so I think that attention to multimodal, to increasing our public transit options, to making biking, walking more realistic for more people, actually, exactly as you're saying, really helps with our traffic problems, which I think, most people in Houston have, particularly over the last couple of decades, really felt the traffic is getting untenable. And as you point out, there's not just a build more roads approach that's going to magically fix that. So we have to think of these other solutions. One thing that I want to, as we're on this transit topic, just talk about is, as I know, Vision Zero is an initiative the city has been running. And as we're thinking about, the safety aspect of things, can you talk a little about what that is and where that's heading?
Sure. As context, Vision Zero is the city's commitment that we will get to 0 fatalities and serious injuries on our roads by 2030. And that sounds like a very lofty goal, and honestly it is. Each year for the last few years, over 300 people have died and nearly 1,600 people have been seriously injured every year on our roadways. So yes, people may say that is a lofty goal, but what better goal could we have? because every single person who dies is a family that doesn't have somebody coming home, is a part of our community that just goes missing, and again, completely within our control. As part of the Vision Zero plan, Mayor Sylvester Turner released his executive order in 2019. We released the Vision Zero Action Plan in 2020, which was a group effort of all the city departments you would imagine: planning and public works, health department, legal, all the mayor's offices, Metro, the Harris County, Houston Police Department, Houston Fire. Everybody was around this table. HGAC is the regional planning body. And we developed 50 actions, which were not just planners doodling up on a board and thinking of pie-high things. These are very, very specific things that we are now implementing. The day after the release of the plan, we formed what we call the implementation group, which is anybody who's listed as has a responsibility in the plan. We meet once a month to see how things are going. And we're very proud to say that we are starting to see results. So the plan was released at the end of 2020. Honestly, in 2021, not much had physically been done to show results. So the numbers did climb a little that year. In 2022, for the first time, we saw crashes and fatalities start to go down. And the first 3 quarters of 23, we're seeing a continuation of that trend. So we have a very, very long way to go. We are still, about that at that 300, 1,600 number. But we are one of the few cities that have very quantifiable actions with results coming through pretty quickly. Some of the best things and things we're so proud of, every place that we have rebuilt using our updated standards and based on a Vision Zero safety approach, has shown a reduction in fatalities and crashes. We know when we rebuild right. And while we have about 80 fatalities for people biking on our roads since the release of the bike plan in 2017, not one of those was in a protected bike lane. So again, what we know is when we build correctly protected facilities that let people choose what mode they want to use, we build it safely, we build it right. The lesson to us is we need to do this faster. We need to get on building out the city's 1,800 miles of high-comfort bike facilities that are in the bike plan. People are shocked when I tell them we have 400 miles built already.
Okay, yes, I am shocked.
We have 155 miles somewhere in planning, design, or construction.
Wow.
Which is fabulous. Other cities marvel when I say we have 400 miles built. We are very, very lucky to have great partners like Houston Parks Board that is invested in our greenways where a lot of those bikeways are, and the county that has helped us build on-street stuff, and the TERSs and management districts. And only by doing this all together are we going to get there. But our standards are better now. We know that when we do it right, and we are starting to see that that progress being made, that we will stand up in front of anybody and say, if you believe everybody should get home safely every single day, you should be a Vision Zero supporter.
That's exciting. I wish I were a more comfortable biker. I'm not, but things like this make me encouraged to try again. So something that I wanted to talk about a little bit is moving back a little bit to the kind of livable places initiative. I think folks often when they hear about some of these changes, and oftentimes when they are looking around and seeing some of the changes coming to the city, it's all that we're getting are these expensive townhouses, and I can't afford that. And I know affordability is actually something that you're really attentive to and thinking about, and there are ways that these approaches are really going to actually help us to keep the city more affordable. So can you talk some to what the future of affordable housing in Houston looks like, but also how what your office is doing is actually really trying to make sure that we do have new affordable homes in the city?
So a couple of the things that I've already talked about are really hallmarks for that. What a primary reason that your home costs as much as it does is the land that it sits on. Land can be 60% of the cost of a new home bought. And when you're in greenfield development and you can do 5,000 square foot lots out of nothing, the cost of the land is not so expensive. But when you're inside the city of Houston and you're doing infill development, and
sorry, can you just define infill development for us?
So let's imagine that you're in a neighborhood that's already been relatively established, and there is some commercial development, or there are a number of vacant lots in the development in the neighborhood. When you build on those lots that are maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sizes big, that's infill. So you're not doing what's called greenfield development, which is taking an open field and creating something new on top of it. You're coming back and almost kind of retrofitting homes or development into a neighborhood. That's very expensive. You don't have the economies of scale that you're going to have when you're doing a large development. You've got the expenses of the construction for placing your equipment and trying to be sensitive to the existing neighborhoods. And so all of that is more expensive. But the number one thing that adds to the cost is the cost of the land. Land inside the city of Houston, let's just say inside the Loop 610, is significantly more expensive than land outside. And so when you require larger lots for developments, you are in effect forcing the home to be more expensive. And since the 90s, up until this new change, we have not allowed you to subdivide a 5,000 square foot lot into anything less than 3 smaller lots. And so those are small lots, yes, but those are still very expensive lots, which is forcing the 3-story townhomes, which is forcing people to go up in order to get to recoup their investment, and that is creating the $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 townhomes that we see. So by allowing smaller lots, either through this courtyard style development that we're talking about, or just being able to subdivide a lot into smaller pieces, it will help reduce the cost. It may not. We may not be building $300,000 homes as much as we'd like, but we will be building less than $600,000 and $700,000. And then there's also the interest that there is a growing number of Houstonians, and I will say primarily younger Houstonians, that are really questioning whether or not they want to invest in homes, whether that's where they want to put their investment and actually buy a house. And so by increasing the ability to do smaller rental properties inside neighborhoods that are complementary to the neighborhood and not stand out like a sore thumb, which is the fourplexes and those types of small rental units. By increasing the ability to do those, we're increasing the ability for people to rent homes, if that's what they want, at a lower cost also. So we believe that what we're doing is providing more homes, which will bring the overall price down, on smaller lots and in more neighborhood-friendly ways to provide either buyers or renters better opportunities, just increasing the opportunities that are available to us.
I mean, I think that's really important because it is one of those things that we often hear about as, here's the solution to the housing crisis here. And at the end of the day, there's a demand problem. Like a lot of people, everybody needs housing. Like it may look different for different families, but everyone needs some kind of shelter. And so just increasing the opportunity to keep developing more housing, I think is so significant, particularly in the city. So something that I wanted to ask you about is you've mentioned the community, you've mentioned building, for better publics and better communities. I know something you're really attentive to is community-led design and community engagement. So as we're talking about changing Houston, and I think that can make folks a little antsy at times about, I don't want my neighborhood to change. I don't know how it's going to change. Can you talk some about how do you go about engaging communities? How do you go about talking with the public to make sure that as we are changing the way our city is going to function, that there is community buy-in?
It's difficult. It's really difficult, especially in a city like Houston, where we have multiple languages and we have multiple different cultures that we want to approach. We do it in a variety of different ways. We are. I will admit, sometimes we're less successful than we'd like, and so we're always looking for better ways. We have found that, the old process of the planning department establishing a meeting at a community center and sending out notification either in the mail or even by email that says, come to our meeting, doesn't work. We have to be very intentional about finding out who do we want to talk to and finding where they are, meeting people where they are in their point in life. And so is that going to a neighborhood's community, a civic club meeting that's already been established, or is that going to a church or a mosque or a temple or a place where people are already gathering, or as David and his team do quite frequently, outdoor festivals. And in October, we're at a lot of festivals because the weather's so terrific. Just listen, and part of it is listening. Again, the old mantra used to be, we're going to go out and we're going to tell you what we're doing. And these days, what we're trying to do is we're trying to go out and listen, and we're trying to ask you, what is it that is what needs to be improved here? What works, and how can we improve what doesn't work? And so what are the pieces that we can bring to the table to help make this a better place? Instead of telling you what you need, we try to listen more.
Yeah, one thing that I agree with everything Margaret just said, that we've been working really hard when we go to a community is ask them, don't tell us the solution you want right now, especially when we're talking about transportation, because very often we'll go to a civic club, we'll go to a neighborhood meeting, let's say, we want a stop sign here. And that may or may not be the right thing, but there also may or may not be reasons we can or cannot do it. But if they tell us this corner feels unsafe, there are drivers speeding, or there's a sightline issue, or we try to cross and there's no cross, whatever it is, then we can come back with a package of things we know we can do. And we can say any one of these we think are going to solve your problem, and then we can get to success. But if they say we want a stop sign and for some reason we can't do a stop sign, then we failed. So really focusing on let the community, and we want them to identify the issue to solve is, and let us come back with a toolbox that could get them there.
Well, and it sounds like some of what you're talking about is broadening the possibilities of a sort. That I think in our heads we're kind of a stop sign that'll fix this problem. In reality, it's we can reshape what this whole intersection looks like. We can rethink how that works. We can if we're getting fewer cars in this area, then there's ways of dealing with that. Which to go back to that issue of how do we reduce some of that traffic? How do we get some of those cars off the roads? I know that Metro has been doing huge work building out new networks. And so something that I think is really interesting in thinking about these transportation networks, but also alongside these communities that are popping up, is transit-oriented development, which is a little buzzwordy. And so I'm going to let you explain what that is. But I wonder if you can talk some about how transit-oriented development is reshaping the city and what's next in that arena.
Sure, and this is a big topic.
I know, we don't have to go into the whole thing.
There's a lot I want to tell you about this. So first on the definition. So transit-oriented development is development, land uses, traditionally a mix of residential and some retail, often office as well, but anchored around high-frequency, high-capacity transit, so that at least one trip by the household every day doesn't need to be a driving trip. You're basically living near a rail station, frequent bus service, because at least one of the people living there probably are going to use that to commute to work. But that only that undersells the story, because the mixed uses are right around you. Then your trip to the park, your child's trip to school, certain trips to the grocery store, maybe not the weekly big for everything, but I need some fruit or some milk or something, is within a walking distance, and I don't need one more car trip for those things. What we've realized is TOD, transit-oriented development, is almost a misnomer, because the transit might be the least important piece of it. That mixed-use, proximate, safe walking environments have got to come before the transit does. Metro has been working on this for a while and have really teed up their game recently. They're working on looking at their park and ride sites. So basically just big parking lots, parking garages that have that high capacity, high frequency transit, but don't have any of those other pieces. And what if we flip it and replace some of that surface parking, possibly with a garage, and put in those mix of land uses on site? So you still have the people using their transit very often, but you have those other land uses picking up a lot of those vehicle trips instead. So you'll start to see this most recently at Addicks Park and Ride out in the Energy Corridor, and Tidwell Transit Center at the end of their University Corridor line. If I can go transit another minute. So one thing that was mentioned earlier is that we have to get past these false narratives defining Houston. People for a long time have said Houston's a driving city, everybody drives. Well, that's not a true statement. There are certain communities that absolutely most of the trips are driving, and then there are other neighborhoods where that's not true at all. There are different times of day and times of year and days of the week. And it is really important that we start to see that me as a middle-aged white guy has one traditional pattern if you were to aggregate us, but different families are looking very, very differently. And especially after COVID, these trips are just so different than they used to be. We need to open our eyes that not everybody is doing the same thing, and they're certainly not doing it every trip, every single day. People have the way to not just be yes drivers or no drivers, but may walk a trip, may take transit a trip, may bike with their kids for a trip, may do any of these things and still be okay driving some of the time, but not necessarily every single time. And the proof is that before COVID, commuting trips to downtown, what people think of as the ultimate trip that everybody drives, 40% of downtown commuters were not driving alone.
Wow.
They were riding park and ride buses, they were walking and biking, they were carpooling. And what's interesting is when you ask people, how did you commute? Almost nobody says, I took the bus. They say, I took the park and ride. And I don't particularly care. Call it whatever you want, as long as you and 39 of your closest friends are on a vehicle that are all sharing getting downtown. That is a win and proof that Houston's a multimodal city.
Well, and I think that not only underscores that, traffic reduction we were talking about, but also, our researcher, Sienna, who's been doing a really great series on kind of urban design around Houston, has been talking with a lot of folks who are building new mixed
mixed use.
Thank you. Yes, mixed use communities. And so, I'm curious. I think you have more of a bird's eye view on this. Do you see this as something that's really growing in popularity and desire around the city?
Yes, I do. And so just spent some time out in Los Angeles at the Urban Land Institute fall meeting where developers from, across America come and commiserate with each other. The number one topic of, kind of office development is really struggling these days with the highest interest rates, the working from home, the struggles that downtowns across America are kind of experiencing. Office is not the most profitable place to put your money these days. But the one thing about an office development that does make it more profitable, more easy to build, and much more sustainable is if it has ancillary uses with it. So an office building off by itself in some suburban area isn't necessarily going to be a successful and full operation, but if it has with it ground floor retail, maybe it has some apartments next door, maybe it does have other uses, other land uses around it, and if it has access to transit, it significantly increases the attractiveness of that building. And so what you look at, you're right, in Houston, what we are seeing so much of in the areas that we would expect it, as well as the areas that we don't expect it. We are seeing multi-use, combined, just buildings that are combining housing and retail. And even though retail is struggling, there is still retail that's successful in Houston. And so if that is all created around areas that we can also get to easily on either foot, bike, or individual cars, transit, any number of modes you want to choose, then that's what's going to make that development successful. And that's also what's going to make the neighborhood surrounding it a little bit more successful. Because as David pointed out, I drive to work every day, but I also walk to my grocery store. Not every time I go, but I do walk. And I walk down the street to a coffee shop that I like. And I'll walk to the arts and crafts store across the street, or I'll take my bike or something like that. So I am somebody that uses different modes frequently. And if I've got all of that within varying areas, varying distances from my home, then I have those opportunities and those options that I can choose whatever mode I want on any one day. The other thing it does is it helps. One of the things that Metro's efforts in their transit-oriented development and some of these other mixed-use developments are doing is it helps bring a variety of income levels to our neighborhoods. Houston has one of our challenges is that over the past 20 years, we've become really bifurcated income-wise. We have neighborhoods that for generations were multi-income. I think of Montrose as the number one example. For those of us that, were in college in the 70s and the 80s in Houston, many of us rented those fourplexes, garage apartments, behind huge homes that were really valuable. So we had a big mix of people and incomes in neighborhoods. We really in Houston don't have that as much anymore. And so being able to provide a variety of housing types that can service a bunch of income levels with the right way of moving around and mobility options is really going to make Houston more of a it's a much more sustainable way of building neighborhoods and of building cities than to have I think we're better off without a zoning code, because we have this ability to have more of a mosaic development pattern than just big blocks of land that serve one or few, very few uses and very few types of people.
Maybe this is beyond the scope of what our conversation can cover, but I'm just so fascinated hearing you talk about what it was like, back when you were a student, because that was before my time in Houston. And it's fascinating to think about. In many ways, what you're suggesting is actually, sounds like in some ways, a return to what we used to have. And so I'm curious, can you talk at all about why you think Houston has changed, where that's not really the dominant form of housing anymore, where we have had these changes that have made it more difficult to build these forms of housing that you're talking about, and that we've gotten further away from these kind of maybe more traditional approaches to city building?
I think it's partly our rules, and I think it's also partly that we haven't been building housing. And so, let's talk about a fourplex, for example. We believed at the time in the 70s that since the 30s those were built, and those were built in neighborhoods. They were built alongside single family homes, and so there was this mix of ownership and rental and incomes and personality types and styles and needs, and then as we looked at them and our fire codes got, well, no, we need to protect this and we need to have that and we need to layer on this rule and then we layer on that rule because we're trying to improve the safety and there's nothing wrong with that. But let's look at the results of some of these rules versus what they do cause. And you've not been able to really even repair a fourplex without bringing everything up to code. And so many of them have gone into disrepair, and we've not. And for every naturally occurring affordable home that gets torn down in Houston, if we're not replacing it with a naturally occurring affordable house, then what we're doing is we're increasing the cost of housing in Houston. And that's really what happened in many of our neighborhoods. As property values started to increase, we would remove affordable housing and put in more expensive housing. And it just exacerbated the situation. And so what we're trying to do is infuse smaller units again back into that neighborhood to help again, create a mix of people who live there to support the retail, to support neighborhood services. My example is I have a 30-year-old daughter who grew up in our neighborhood, and when she started looking for homes, she couldn't afford one, and so now she's living.
I feel her pain.
Yeah, and so the local AARP group is very intentional about their efforts to create homes that sustain us across a lifetime, and we haven't done that in the past, and so as your kids move out of your home, they move into apartments, usually in a different neighborhood because they can't afford where they grew up. These backyard garage apartments, these smaller homes can give them an opportunity to have their a foothold in a neighborhood. And it's also a way for you to maybe bring in your grandparents or your parents who can no longer be by themselves in their homes. It's a way to have them in your backyard, a little closer, but not exactly on top of you. And so
I've been thinking about that a lot this conversation.
So all of these options, we haven't really been giving the diversity and the variety of homes. We haven't been building that variety that we've needed to build for decades.
I think that's so significant too that you were talking earlier about younger people thinking about renting more, maybe wanting different kinds of options. And as a young-ish person, I will say that I talk to a lot of folks who absolutely there's desire for mixed use housing, for different kinds of neighborhoods, for different experiences. Absolutely what you were saying about the ability to move your parents into something in the backyard, maybe where you still have 10 to 20 feet of safety space, but they're much closer. So we're running out of time now, but I do want to turn things over and just ask, I'm so privileged to speak with both of you, and thank you so much for coming and sharing all this and having this wonderful conversation. But, as you are thinking about the future of Houston, a place that we love to talk about how much it changes and how much Houston is always changing, what do you think is next for Houston? What are the big things coming down? What are the things we should be paying attention to? And what are you particularly maybe excited about as initiatives that you're running, or the things you'd like to share that you think are really exciting for us to know about the future of the city?
So I have two. First, I'm going to start. I'm going to start with actually location. So I'm still a relatively new transplant. I've been here almost 4 years now, exploring different neighborhoods. And I'm kind of in love with the East End. East End, 2nd Ward, down to Edo, 3rd Ward. That area of the city has never had kind of the stardom of some of our other neighborhoods. And they are booming in this wonderfully kind of homegrown way. This is not a whole lot of foreign, chain stores coming in and changing it and just being any place USA. Edo is a great example of what was definitely not there 10 years ago, is totally new and vibrant and feeling very good. It's a very interesting thing that I think Houston on the national scale doesn't get enough credit for, just how unique a lot of these neighborhoods are. It's not just, service roads on the side of the freeway over and over again, rinse and repeat. These are very unique places that I really encourage people in town to go see and people when they're coming from outside to go see. On our side, on the programmatic side, we talked for a little bit about parking. Minimum parking requirements are part of our development code, even though in livable places we worked hard to make them context sensitive. I believe we're ready to stop thinking of parking as its own thing, but as a conversation about access. So certainly, we've defaulted to everybody drives, so we need to provide so much parking because that's how we provide access to the site. But if we take a step back and we say lots of people get here by lots of ways, how do we provide access to each site? And parking is probably going to be a part of that for a very long time. But why are we not saying there is good bus service here? How do we take advantage of that and lower the needed parking? Making sure we have the walkability so that somebody can walk across the street to their coffee shop and not need a parking space for it. And it is that reframing of the conversation from parking to access that I think just unlocks so much community building.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things on our plate that. So Houston is this amazing gumbo of energy and ideas, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to throw out what's next for Houston is. I think that Houstonians are going to tell us, and that's one of the joys of being planning director is that I get told what Houston will be as much as I tell people what it will be, and I think we're a city that is on the cusp of big things. Been here since the 70s, and I've watched so much growth and so much change. I remember the bumper stickers that said "Last one in Michigan, turn out the lights," and the fact that we had more U-Hauls coming into Houston every day than all other cities in America combined, or whatever that statistic was. I think we're going to be there again. I think that, and it may not be total and absolute population growth, but I think it's going to be, a real firming up of the inner city, the core of our being, continuing this diversity, continuing this amazing city that we are, and I'm anxious just to see where it goes.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much. I'm so excited to have gotten to speak with you both, and I so appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll go over to our researcher, Jaden Bray-Boyce, who has an update on how to get involved around town this week.
Hey y'all, I hope you're doing well. This week I have 2 volunteer opportunities for you. If you fall between the ages of 16 and 100, I have the perfect job for you. On November 25th, sign up and volunteer at Beauty's Community Garden. From 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., volunteers have the chance to help plant and attend a Garden Volunteers guided gardening experience. If gardening excites you, then go to the website volunteerhouston.org and select November 25th, and then all you have to do is click the link, sign up, and you're good to go. This opportunity is a little bit different, but with it being the week of Thanksgiving, consider volunteering to help serve hot meals to those in need on November 22nd, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Help make this Thanksgiving season a little more special by providing hot and filling meals to those who need it most, along with supplies like personal care items and blankets. You must be 10 years or older to participate, but if you're under 18, please make sure that you have a guardian sign off. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Jaden. Next time on Gulf Streams, we're speaking with Rice Director of Sustainability Richard Johnson and the University of Houston Sustainability Director Elizabeth Clark about measures universities are taking to be cleaner, as well as how they're training our youth for lifelong careers around making the world greener. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081 or email me at westont@rice.edu. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski, co-produced by Joseph Campana, audio engineer Rico Enriquez, research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce and Sienna Yin. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards here on KPFT Houston.